My name is Emma, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I'd be planning my husband's funeral. 2 weeks ago, I lost David, my partner of 9 years, to a sudden heart attack. He was only 34, just days after we laid him to rest. My world shattered again when my younger sister Rachel made a shocking announcement at what should have been a simple family dinner. David and I met 10 years ago at a volunteer event for homeless veterans. I was coordinating donations while he was helping serve meals, his sleeves rolled up, genuinely engaged with every person in line. When he approached me afterward, holding 2 cups of coffee, I was struck by his warm brown eyes and the way he listened intently to everything I said. I noticed you haven't taken a break all day, he said, offering me one of the cups. That was David, always observing, always caring about others before himself. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant where we talked until closing time. He was a financial advisor who had started his own firm, ambitious but grounded. The kind of man who remembered your coffee order and asked about your day like he genuinely wanted to know the answer. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. David's vows made half the guests cry, including his usually stoic father. We bought a modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, nothing fancy but perfect for us. It had a large kitchen where David loved to cook and a small office where I ran my freelance graphic design business. For years, we tried to have children. Month after month of disappointment led to doctor's appointments, tests, and eventually 3 rounds of IVF that emptied our savings account and our emotional reserves. The final attempt failed spectacularly, leaving me sobbing in David's arms. In a sterile clinic parking lot, "We have each other," David said that night, holding me as I grieved the family we'd never have. "That's enough. That's more than enough." And it was. We traveled, renovated our house, built our careers, and created a life filled with friends, adventures, and quiet contentment. David supported my decision to expand my design business, even co-signing a small business loan when the bank hesitated. My sister Rachel was always the wild card in our family. 3 years younger than me, she'd been the rebellious teenager who stayed out past curfew, the college dropout who changed majors 4 times, the 20-something who moved from job to job and relationship to relationship with exhausting frequency. Where I was cautious and deliberate, Rachel was impulsive and dramatic. Our parents constantly worried about her, which usually translated into financial bailouts and damage control. Rachel seemed to resent the stability David and I had built, often making snide comments about our boring life or our lack of children. 2 years ago, Rachel started dating Marcus, a construction worker she met at a bar. Their relationship was volatile, passionate reunions followed by explosive breakups that inevitably involved our parents mediating or providing temporary housing when one of them stormed out. Then came Rachel's pregnancy announcement last Christmas. It was unexpected. To put it mildly, Rachel had always been vocal about not wanting children, calling them dream killers and financial disasters. Yet there she was, tearfully announcing her pregnancy while Marcus sat beside her looking uncomfortable. I felt the familiar stab of jealousy, but I pushed it down. Despite our complicated relationship, I was determined to be a supportive aunt. When baby Oliver was born 7 months later, I was at the hospital with flowers and a handmade blanket. Rachel struggled with new motherhood. She called me frequently in tears, overwhelmed by Oliver's colic and her exhaustion. I helped whenever I could, taking Oliver for entire weekends so she could sleep. David was supportive but maintained some distance. I assumed it was because of our own fertility struggles. Then came that terrible Wednesday morning. David complained of chest pain while getting ready for work. I begged him to stay home, but he had a crucial client presentation. "It's just stress," he insisted, kissing me goodbye. "I'll call you after the meeting." That call never came. Instead, I received one from the hospital. By the time I arrived, David was gone. Massive heart attack, they said. Nothing could have been done. He was 34 years old. The following days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and casseroles from well-meaning neighbors. Rachel was notably absent during most of it, sending brief texts about being overwhelmed with the baby. When she did appear at the funeral, she stayed in the back and left immediately after the service. 1 week after the funeral, my parents insisted I join them for Sunday dinner. "You need to be around family," my mother said firmly. "David would want you to take care of yourself." I dragged myself to their house, where Rachel was already seated at the dining table with Oliver in a high chair beside her. She looked different, more confident somehow, wearing new clothes I didn't recognize. We were halfway through my mother's pot roast when Rachel suddenly stood up, her water glass in hand like she was about to make a toast. "I have something important to tell everyone," she announced, her voice cutting through the quiet dinner conversation. My stomach dropped. Something in her tone set off alarm bells. "Oliver isn't Marcus's son," she said, looking directly at me. "He's David's." The words hit me like a physical blow. My father's fork clattered against his plate. My mother gasped audibly. "What are you talking about?" I managed to whisper. Rachel's confidence seemed to grow with each word. "David and I had an affair 18 months ago. We met several times when you thought he was working late. Oliver was conceived during one of those meetings." I stared at her in complete shock, my mind refusing to process what I was hearing. "That's impossible," I said weakly. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "David knew the truth. Before he died, he updated his will to provide for his son." She handed me the paper with a flourish. "According to this, Oliver is entitled to half of everything David owned, including your house." My hands shook as I scanned the document. It looked official enough, typed legal language and what appeared to be David's signature at the bottom. But something felt wrong about it, though I couldn't articulate what. "I need to go," I said abruptly, standing up so quickly my chair nearly toppled over. "Emma, wait," my mother called, but I was already grabbing my purse and heading for the door. Once in my car, I sat in my parents' driveway and tried to process what had just happened. My sister was claiming she'd had an affair with my husband, that her son was actually my husband's child, that David had secretly updated his will to leave half our assets to a baby I'd been helping to raise. The more I thought about it, the more something nagged at me. David's behavior, his distance from Oliver, the timeline, none of it made sense. That night, I called David's best friend and business partner, James, and asked if he could recommend a lawyer. I needed to understand what was happening and whether Rachel's claims had any legal merit. 2 days later, I sat across from Sarah Mitchell, an estate attorney James had recommended. I explained the situation, showed her the will Rachel had presented, and waited for her assessment. Sarah examined the document carefully, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Mrs. Henderson," she said finally, "this document has several serious problems. The legal language is incorrect in multiple places, the formatting doesn't match standard will templates, and frankly, this signature looks suspicious." She pulled out a magnifying glass and studied David's supposed signature. "See how the D connects to the A? That's not consistent with other samples of your husband's signature I found online from his business filings. And the paper quality is wrong. This looks like it was printed on a home printer, not prepared by a law office." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by anger. "So it's fake?" "I believe so, but we'll need a handwriting expert to confirm it. More importantly, do you have a copy of David's legitimate will?" I nodded. "It's in our safe deposit box at the bank. David updated it 2 years ago after we bought life insurance." "Good. We'll need to retrieve that immediately. And Mrs. Henderson, if your sister forged this document, that's a serious crime. Are you prepared to pursue legal action?" I thought about Oliver innocent in all this. Then I thought about David's memory being tarnished by lies, and my anger hardened into resolve. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to know the truth." The next morning, Sarah and I went to the bank. The legitimate will was exactly as I remembered, everything left to me, with no mention of any children. But as Sarah examined it, she made an interesting discovery. "Look at this clause," she said, pointing to a section I'd never paid attention to before. "David specifically states that he has no biological children and has undergone medical procedures that make future biological children impossible." My heart stopped. "What kind of medical procedures?" Sarah suggested we contact David's doctor. With the proper legal documentation, we could access his medical records to understand what the will referenced. Dr. Peterson, David's longtime physician, was sympathetic when Sarah explained the situation. After reviewing the legal requirements, he agreed to share relevant information. "David had a vasectomy 15 months ago," Dr. Peterson explained during our phone call. "It was performed after he experienced complications from a hernia surgery. The procedure was completely successful. Follow-up tests confirmed he was sterile." The timeline hit me like a thunderbolt. David's vasectomy had been performed 3 months before Oliver was conceived. It was medically impossible for him to be the father. I sat in Sarah's office, staring at the medical records, feeling a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. David hadn't cheated on me, but my sister had orchestrated an elaborate lie, preying on my grief to try to steal half of everything David and I had built together. What do we do now? I asked Sarah. We gather more evidence, she replied. I recommend hiring a private investigator to look into your sister's current situation. There's usually a strong motivation behind fraud of this magnitude. The private investigator, Tom Bradley, was a former police detective who specialized in family disputes. Within 3 days, he'd uncovered information that explained everything. Rachel was drowning in debt over $60,000 across multiple credit cards and personal loans. She'd been fired from her last job for excessive absences and was facing eviction from her apartment. Marcus had left her shortly after Oliver was born and was providing minimal child support. Even more damaging, Tom had obtained copies of text messages between Rachel and her friend Lisa, sent in the days following David's funeral. Finally have a chance to get what I deserve. That house is worth at least $400,000 now. If I play this right, I'll never have to worry about money again. The will looks perfect. Jake did a great job with the signature. Found a sample online and traced it perfectly. Emma always got everything: the perfect husband, the nice house, the successful business. Time for me to get my share. Reading those messages felt like being punched in the stomach. This wasn't a desperate decision made in a moment of panic. It was a calculated plan to defraud me while I was grieving my husband. Armed with all this evidence, I decided to confront Rachel directly. I called and asked her to meet me at a coffee shop near her apartment, claiming I wanted to discuss the logistics of David's supposed support for Oliver. Rachel arrived looking confident, even smug. She'd clearly expected me to capitulate without a fight. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Oliver deserves his father's support. I placed a folder on the table between us. Before we discuss Oliver's future, I need you to explain exactly when and where this alleged affair took place. Rachel launched into a detailed story: hotel meetings, secret phone calls, David's supposed dissatisfaction with our marriage. But as I asked specific questions, her story began to fall apart. She claimed they met at the downtown Marriott, but couldn't remember which room or what floor. She said David always ordered wine with dinner, but David didn't drink alcohol due to a medication he took. Small details that someone who'd actually been intimate with David would know, but Rachel clearly didn't. When her story had thoroughly unraveled, I opened my folder. This is David's medical record, I said calmly, sliding the document across the table. He had a vasectomy 15 months ago, 3 months before Oliver was conceived. It was medically impossible for him to father a child. Rachel's face went white as she read the clinical details. These could be fake, she said weakly. They're not. Dr. Peterson is prepared to testify to their authenticity. But that's not all. I showed her the text messages Tom had obtained watching. As her confident facade completely crumbled, creating a fraudulent will is a felony, Rachel. So is attempting to obtain property through false pretenses. You could go to prison for this. For a long moment, she sat in stunned silence. Then she began to cry, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use on our parents, but deep, genuine sobs of desperation. I didn't know what else to do, she finally said. I'm going to lose my apartment. Oliver and I will be homeless. I thought, if I could just get some money from the house. So you decided to destroy David's memory? To tell everyone he cheated on me while I'm still grieving him? I was desperate, she shouted, causing other coffee shop patrons to stare. You have everything: the house, the business, everyone's respect. What do I have? A baby I can barely afford and debt I'll never pay off. Her admission hung in the air between us. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her desperation, even as I remained furious about her methods. What happens now? She asked quietly. I considered my options. I could press charges and likely see Rachel go to prison. I could expose her publicly, destroying what little reputation she had left. Or I could find a different path, one that protected Oliver while still holding Rachel accountable. You're going to tell our parents the truth, I said finally. All of it. The fake affair, the forged will, everything. And then we'll discuss how to help Oliver without rewarding your fraud. That evening, I called my parents and asked them to come over. When they arrived, Rachel was already there, looking miserable and defeated. I lied, she said, without preamble. About David, about the affair, about the will. None of it was true. My parents stared at her in shock as she explained her desperate financial situation and the elaborate fraud she'd attempted. "Oh, Rachel," my mother said, tears in her eyes. "How could you do this to your sister? To David's memory?" "I was desperate," Rachel repeated. "But that doesn't excuse it. I know what I did was horrible." My father looked between us, trying to process everything. "What happens now? Are you pressing charges, Emma?" I took a deep breath. "No, but there will be consequences and conditions." I outlined my plan. Rachel would undergo counseling to address her financial problems and understand why she'd made such destructive choices. She would find stable employment and maintain it. In exchange, I would help establish a modest trust fund for Oliver's education and medical needs, not because of any false claim about David's parentage, but because he was my nephew and deserved support. "Why would you help me after what I did?" Rachel asked. "I'm not helping you," I said firmly. "I'm helping Oliver. And I'm protecting David's memory by ensuring the truth is known." Over the following months, Rachel slowly began to rebuild her life. The counseling helped her understand the patterns of jealousy and competition that had driven so many of her destructive decisions. She found work as a receptionist at a medical office, providing steady income and benefits. Our relationship remained distant but civil. I saw Oliver regularly, taking him to the park or the zoo, watching him grow into a curious, happy toddler. Rachel and I didn't pretend to be close, but we found a way to coexist peacefully for his sake. My parents struggled initially with the new boundaries I'd established. They'd spent years enabling Rachel's behavior, and it was difficult for them to step back and let her face natural consequences. But gradually, they learned to offer support without creating dependency. As for me, the betrayal taught me valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of protecting yourself, even from family. The grief support group I joined helped me process not only David's death, but also the secondary trauma of Rachel's betrayal. 6 months after the confrontation, I started the David Henderson Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing careers in financial planning. It felt good to see David's legacy continue in a positive way, helping young people build stable futures. I also began dating again, slowly and carefully. I met Robert at a volunteer event. He was a teacher who reminded me of David in his kindness and integrity. We took things slowly, both understanding that my first marriage had been precious and that any future relationship would be different, not a replacement. Standing in my garden one year after David's death, I reflected on everything that had happened. The daffodils he'd planted were blooming, bright yellow against the green grass. I'd survived not just his death, but my sister's betrayal. I'd found ways to honor his memory while building a new life for myself. Rachel's attempt to destroy everything David and I had built together had failed. Instead, it had forced me to discover my own strength, to establish healthy boundaries, and to understand that real love like David's protects us even after it's gone. Sometimes the most painful betrayals come from the people closest to us, but they can also reveal truths we need to face. Rachel's lies had been exposed, but more importantly, David's integrity remained intact. His love story with me couldn't be rewritten by someone else's desperate fiction. The trust he'd placed in me, the life we'd built together, and the legacy he'd left behind, those were real things that no forged document could touch. And in the end, truth had prevailed over lies, love over betrayal, and hope over despair. As I headed back inside, I felt David's presence. In the garden he'd tended, in the home we'd shared, and in the strength he'd helped me build. His love had prepared me to face even the worst betrayal and emerge stronger on the other side.